Society of Petroleum Engineers Executive Series event, both hosted and sponsored by ExxonMobil. Tonight we will be featuring a fireside chat interview with the Chairman and CEO, Mr. Darren W. Woods, and also our moderator, Dr. Thomas Blasingame. So let's just go ahead and get started into the event. Please give a warm welcome for our moderator who will introduce our speaker, Dr. Thomas Blasingame.
Well, thank you, everyone. I didn't realize I was introducing him. I thought you were. Well, everyone, without any further ado, we have Darren Woods of ExxonMobil. He's traveled all the way from Dallas on a semi-nice day, a little warm, but thanks for coming. And he has told me that he's here for you, for your questions, for the kinds of things that you want to participate in. We do have a format where he's going to talk a little bit about things he wants to, and then we have a group of selected questions where his staff and I have massaged a few things, and then we have some student input questions. Some of you probably submitted. To keep things organized, we decided to have the officers sitting over here on the front row give those questions. I double randomized them, by the way, so you'll never know who it is. And then if you're willing, I think we could probably take a couple of open questions. But we're here to thank you for coming. Class of '87, electrical engineering. I'm supposed to make some quip about how easy electrical engineering is, but frankly, I don't want to talk about grades. And no, I did not look his up, but I'm certain they were better than mine, so I'll let Darren have the floor.
Thank you, Tom, and good evening, everybody. First of all, I want to thank everyone who's involved in setting this up. It's a real pleasure for me to be back here, and actually, my schedule's pretty busy, but I feel somewhat guilty. I met with Dr. Banks earlier today and said I don't feel like I'm fulfilling my responsibility to the school, given the start that it gave me in my career. So in my mind, this is just a very small way of showing my gratitude for the experience that I had here on the campus and the good start that it gave me in the career and the life that I've had. I do mean it. I know I have a bunch of people that try to take care of me, and they do a pretty good job of it. And so they try to make sure they manage all these events and things like that. But I told Tom this, and I tell all of you this. I'm completely open to talking about any aspect of life, work, education. I'm really kind of open to any types of questions. And in this role, in particular, in this industry in particular, you got to have a little bit of a thick skin, so my feelings will not get hurt. I promise you that. I thought I would just start maybe by just telling you a little bit about myself, because I'm a real big believer that where you come from and who you are as a person has a big impact on where you end up in life, and so I always like to start conversations like this, and where people want to know a little bit about kind of my career and my life, is to start how I got to this point and where I went from. And so just a little bit about me, and then I'm going to open it up to the questions. My father worked with the U.S. military, and so as a child, I moved every couple of years my entire life until I got to Texas the middle of my junior year, and I was pretty keen to kind of stay in Texas. I'd been moving around for a lot, and so when it came time to choose a school, this is probably not going to please this crowd, but I applied to Texas A&M, to University of Texas, and to Rice University. And before I had made a decision where to go, I was dating the woman who is now my wife. Her family were dedicated Aggies, and so she was coming to A&M, and I was somewhat ambivalent. And so I came to A&M because my wife was coming to A&M. And so in a career, and people ask, well, what was the most influential thing that happened to you in A&M? It helped me get my wife, which I've had for now over 32 years. We've known each other and been together for 37 years. And I would tell you that was probably one of the most important first steps I took in my life, because it established a foundation that we built on ever since then. And I'll tell you, if you're not happy at home, you're not going to be happy at work. And so that was a really critical step in my mind. I came to A&M, spent 4 years at A&M. I was going to go into R&D. I was a techie guy, really focused on science. I loved math, got into electromagnetics, and was going to get a PhD when I graduated, go get a master's and a PhD. University of Illinois was the specialty, was the school that had that specialty. After a senior project, I did some research my senior year instead of a senior project on the area that I wanted to study. Got really burned out on that, so decided I want to go work for a little while, make sure that the decisions that I had made in school for a lifelong career were the right ones, and so I wanted to go out and get a bit of experience. My professors were not happy with me for walking away from a career, an academic career. I promised them I'd be back in school in 3 years. They said, once you get a taste for the money, you won't go back. I said, in 3 years, I will be back in school. I commit to you about that. And I was. 3 years later, I was back in school, but I was getting an MBA instead of a technical degree. I asked my professors to write recommendation letters for me. They weren't as happy to do that as they had been the first time. But I did that really because what I learned in those 3 years is working, you can be the best engineer, but if you don't know how to sell your ideas and to make money to fund those ideas, it's difficult to be successful. And I really struggled because I had committed and was so narrowly developed as a student when I was picking my courses. I felt like I needed to learn a lot more about how you make money, how you fund the good ideas. And so I got my MBA, and then I joined Exxon and started traveling the world with Exxon. I didn't join Exxon. I didn't want to work necessarily for an oil and gas company, and I certainly didn't want to work for a big one. But I wanted a general management career, and I wanted to go international, and I wanted somebody who was committed to developing me as a person. And that's what ExxonMobil committed to. And 27 years later, I would tell you they did exactly what they said they would, and I did what I said I would, which is give them my best. And fortunately, it worked out for the both of us. So maybe I'll stop there and turn it over to questions.
Sure. I wanted to also acknowledge Anthony. Stand up for a second. Anthony did most of your arrangements, so you can give him a hug.
Thank you.
And Kristen Huttar, who now works for you, she was primarily responsible for this invitation. It took about 1.5 years, but we got you here, and thank you very much for getting us on your calendar. I was thinking the first question I wanted to ask to test your geographic knowledge is what used to be on the side of this building? And if you know, then I guess we'll give you a prize.
Pass.
Come on, you remember.
I have no idea.
Come on,
This building's been around for 20 years. I've been gone for 32.
Yeah, but when we were here, what was this building? Come on, you remember well.
I don't remember.
This was the police station.
Okay,
and we had to come pay our tickets here. Okay, well,
I was a good student. I never ended up with the police.
Technically.
I don't know what you were doing, Tom, but I was not going to the police department.
It wasn't a willing experience. Okay, so first of all, we emphasize leadership here, as you know, and with your Texas A&M degree in hand, you rose to one of the preeminent leadership positions in the entire business world. That must be pretty intimidating to hear that. I don't like when people talk about me either, but we'll see how you take this question. Tell us about your leadership philosophy, and while you're doing that, I want you to think about, I have this personal code for Texas A&M. It's called Duty, Honor, and Service. Can you tell us what Texas A&M taught you as a code or as a sort of a guidepost?
Yeah, sure. So a little bit about leadership. People talk about whether leaders are born or made, and I believe it's a bit of a combination of both, frankly. I think there are certain characteristics that lend themselves to leadership, and then experience then shapes those capabilities, which then can help contribute to being a leader and an effective leader. And frankly, I never considered myself a leader per se. But what I would say, my experience growing up, and I mentioned to you, I moved around every couple of years. I lived overseas. It is a difficult, and I'm sure some of you have had this lifestyle. It's a difficult life as a kid to move around every couple of years. You're always the odd person out. You're always the outsider. And I think, after doing that year after year after year, you have to decide whether you're going to try to be like everybody else and fit in, or whether you're going to define your values and live by them and take the consequences of that. And I chose the latter. Very early in my years, I decided I'm going to do what I think is right and not try to adjust to every new location I went to and every new set of values that I encountered. That was a tough choice to make as a kid. but it has served me well in life. And so I think, from my standpoint, I always tell people probably the number one rule in my mind in leadership is to thine own self be true. I think if you're not true to yourself, you don't understand your values, you don't know what you're about, it's very hard to lead others. And so my rules on leadership is first understand yourself. I think that's absolutely critical. Know what your weaknesses are. You can certainly know your strengths, but those will come out. It's the weaknesses that'll catch you. So know your weaknesses. I think my second rule is know your people. I think that's absolutely critical. And we were just talking about this before we got up here on stage. Know the strengths and weaknesses of your people, but then probably the most important thing is, once you've decided a direction that you want to go, you've got to figure out whether your people are aligned and ready or willing to go with you, and are they committed to the cause? And you can work on that for a while, but at some point you have to decide if you're not with me, then you're not with me, and you have to kind of get a new team in. And I was sharing one of the big mistakes I made early on as I was moving up through the company is I carried too many people for too long that were not aligned with what we were trying to achieve. And I'd say as I progressed in my career, I became much more black and white about making sure the people on my teams were committed to what we were trying to achieve. And so you got to know your people. And then the third thing for me is you got to know your business. And I had never, in the course of my career, ever let the job that I came into define me or what I did. I understood what was required to deliver that job, but then thought about how do I contribute and contribute more value through this job? What is the value creation step that I'm involved in and I'm responsible for in that job? And then how do I maximize that? And so the third piece is know your business or know your job. In terms of A&M, I didn't appreciate when I was in school. I would just tell you the Aggie Honor Code. Very early on into my career with ExxonMobil, I relied on that time and time again. And I will tell you, you may be surprised, but over the course of the number of people that I would have to discharge from the company and fire for lying was just, and people would say, well, you fire people, what is it? I said, you lie, cheat, or steal, you're out. It's that simple, because we don't, I won't do that, and I won't tolerate those who do. And that's direct, that was the Aggie Honor Code, and I would tell you that served me well my entire life. And I would tell you, coming back to this school after, I left, was away for over 20-something years and came back, and the thing that resonated with me so much, and I didn't appreciate it until I came back as a manager in this company, is the value system that you have here at this what the A&M have, the value system of A&M. I just think it is a huge advantage over a lot of universities around the world. And I don't know if you all appreciate that today as much as I do, but I think at some point, if you don't now, you will when you look back on it, because it's a good anchor, it's a good rock to hang on to as you're moving through the turbulent world out there.
Excellent. Wow. I think you just answered all the questions, but we got a couple more. Was there a particular moment or incident or even course that you took at Texas A&M that affected you? I can tell you taking mechanical engineering 212 twice it significantly increased my resilience. There are probably some people in here that they know I don't teach undergrad anymore, but they're deathly afraid of if I ever did again. Where's Andreas? Andreas is the last person. Yeah, why don't you tell Mr. Woods about our experience? Maybe later.
The weed out classes that you have, I think it was structured a little bit differently in the day that I went through, but my first electrical engineering weed out class, I can't remember the number on it, but I remember who taught it. It was Dr. Geiger, and I think it was circuits. And the first test we took in that class, when he was handing the test back, he scored on 120 points, but only counted 100, so you got 20 bonus points in the base case. In that first test I took in his class, 120 points, I scored a 56.
That's pretty good. That's half.
Slightly under half.
Really?
That was kind of you talk about your stomach falling through your feet. I was shocked. Of course, this is before I really realized the curves, and when he got up to talk about the curve in the class, the highest grade in the class was 56, which kind of changed the dynamic. You never see anybody sink and lift so quickly, but the point, which was really what I really took away from that, and you know, of course, everybody's upset because you take this really difficult course. What's the point of that? Of making everybody technically fail your test? And Dr. Geiger said, you know, I wasn't interested, and one of the kids said, this is nothing like our homework. And he said, if I know you can do your homework, I want to know if you understand the principles behind your homework, and that's what I'm testing. And I'm not testing just what you learned. I'm testing if you can extrapolate to what it should, you know, to take these points and to do something, because that's what an engineer's job is. It's not to solve known problems, it's to take the principles and solve the unknown problems. That was a very powerful message for me as a kid, or as a young person coming into this thing, is to this idea that it's all about taking the principles and then doing something that others haven't done before, or solving problems that others haven't done before. And frankly, that really got me jazzed up about engineering, and I would say it's been one of the fundamentals of my career as I've gone through the career. I love doing things that other people say can't be done, and I would say it comes back to this philosophy I learned here at school. I never got very good high grades on any of his tests, though, I'll tell you that.
Well, 56 was the highest score. That sounds about right. Andres, do you remember? You actually did pretty well. You did make a very strong A. And everybody goes, oh, he's just saying that. Nope, I recall the good and the bad, and you did very well. Everybody wants to hear about ExxonMobil, and I think I'm just going to give you an open mic and let you talk about ExxonMobil. This is a good crowd. They're going to want to know what the #1 energy company in the world thinks, what they're going to do. I gave a presentation in 2004 where I proposed an energy engineering curricula, and someone in the audience, it was petroleum engineering people, screamed traitor. And I had a quiz question at the end of it, and it was, what will be the #1 energy company in the world in 2100? And it was your company with a few letters missing, you know, like on, what is it, Wheel of Fortune or something. So I already know what my answer is, but why don't you tell us what you think? And I wanted to preface this morning while I was taking my long 3-mile walk in the rain. I was thinking of how I would explain this if it were me. Because when I was in thermodynamics class, my professor said that any energy source that's so dilute that you can walk through it will never be of any economic consequence, i.e. wind and solar. And look at now, you know, and we can debate whether or not they're of economic consequence, but they're definitely part of the mix. So with all that, tell us where you are, where you're going, and it's all yours.
Okay. So let me just start defining the company, and what I'd say is the thing that we focus on most, and it underpins everything that we do as a company, and it's our people. So first and foremost, I would tell you, and some of the folks just hired on that I was chatting with, you know, we don't hire people for a job. We hire them for a career. And that's, I think, a really important point that maybe folks at your stage of life don't think too much about that. I know when I joined Exxon at the time, and I met with our HR people, and they were talking about this philosophy of a career. I just joined the company, telling me about all our pension plans, all this kind of stuff. And I remember I said to her, you're talking like we just got married. As far as I'm concerned, we're just dating. Because I hadn't decided this is a company I'm going to commit myself to for the rest of my life. And I never went into it with that idea. It was almost like over time we figured it out, and next thing you know, we wake up and it's 27 years later. But I think this idea that we're not looking for an individual to come in and do the job, but instead we're looking to bring people in and to help them grow to their full and to realize their full potential. And for us to be successful, we're a 135-year plus company. To be successful, our job is to make sure that we enable everyone to reach their full potential and to challenge them and develop them. And so that's a big, big part of how I would define our company and what makes us successful and what will make us successful going forward. So it starts with the people, which is, I have a model. I start with values, standards, people, and leadership are kind of the fundamentals of what we build our company on. More specifically, when you talk about the business that we're in, people always ask, you oil and gas, how do you think about your company? I start with we're a technology company. We invest in science. We spend $1 billion a year in R&D. We do R&D. We have capabilities that span things that go well outside the oil and gas business. In fact, every 4 years, we have independent surveys that come in and assess our technical capabilities to address the challenges in the world and make sure that we have the right core competencies in the science side of the equation. Because our belief is that technology will play a fundamental role in the evolution of our planet and the evolution of wherever the world goes and in turn where our company goes. So that's a foundation and a philosophy that we've invested in for many, many, many years. And so I say first we're a technology company. Above and beyond that, I would say we're in the hydrocarbon business. And people will think automatically oil and gas, but I will tell you we are pursuing technologies to capture carbon. And we are pursuing technologies to turn that carbon into something else. And what I tell my board is, with the right kind of technology breakthroughs, we could be in the building materials business, right? I mean, it's a hydrocarbon derived, but it's not oil and gas. It's a different, just like our chemicals business is. And so I don't limit myself to oil and gas because that's the primary outlet today for hydrocarbons, but I have the capacity to move in others if it opens itself up. So hydrocarbons the next layer, and then I would say oil and gas and chemicals is the layer after that. And that's kind of how I think about our business. With respect to the future, where this industry is going, we were just having a conversation with President Young and Dean Banks, and the point that I've always made in this space is when it comes to climate change and the risk associated with climate change and the implication for the industry and the world is we're having way too narrow of a conversation. Unfortunately, we've let a very narrow group of impassioned people define the conversation that we're allowed to have in this space, and it's doing a disservice to societies around the world because this is an incredibly hard problem. People think as an oil and gas company, defined by the outside oil and gas company, that we're somehow threatened with the evolution or potential evolution in the energy system. And what I would tell you is the energy system has been evolving for 135 years, and we've been pretty successful across that time frame. And our view is it's going to continue to evolve, and our job is to evolve with it. My job as the leader of this company is to make sure that our company is meeting the demands of society. And today's society continues to demand energy because it plays such a fundamental role in people's well-beings, in their prosperity, in their standards of living. Half the people in the world today are living at a level below what would be considered an acceptable prosperity index. 2 billion people don't have access to clean fuels. A little under 1 billion people don't have access to electricity. We've got to solve that problem. Energy is going to be in the mix. And then the question is, what form of energy? The big drive out there today is society wants less carbon-intensive sources of energy. Fine, we'll respond to that. We'll find that. But it's going to take a technology to do it, and that's what we're working on. So that's what our technology platform. I see a future, a long, long future for the company. A lot of it for the next 50 years will be in oil and gas. But where we go from there is a function of where technology takes us. And we have a really hard time of predicting where technology will take us.
So you sort of mentioned this, and I brought you a gift because guys our age need a boost. You can probably tell your wife of 32 or 37 years that I tried to make a drug addict out of you, but I won't do that. Sorry, I'm not using a microphone. What do you think about this lower for longer business cycle? Is it a business cycle, or is it a societal change? What companies will survive and why? And you've got a couple of hundred young people in here who are hanging on your every syllable, wondering what their job prospects are going to be. They've got an education, they've got a lot of enthusiasm, but we're in I wouldn't call it a slump, just a change. And you pointed out that this change is dictated by society, but it will be guided by technology, and maybe that helps with your answer, I guess.
Well, so if you talk about the market where we're at today, it's not a demand issue. It's a supply issue. There's a lot of supply out there. I think the industry's gotten very good at doing its job and finding resources and bringing those online and delivering to the world very efficiently and at very low cost. I think people haven't fully realized the impact that unconventional shale oil has had on the markets, both now in the short term and then going forward, not only for oil but for gas. We just talk a little bit about what that is. If you go back in time, the way I would characterize the challenge in the upstream was it was a challenge of discovery. And what you found is, society continued to grow, economies continued to grow around the world, demand for energy continued to grow, and demand for oil continued to grow, but it was a fairly steady pace over time. These discoveries would come and go, and when you found a lot of discoveries that came onto production, supply overwhelmed demand, and you'd have very low oil prices. And then those prices would stay low until demand eventually outgrew that supply, and you got back tight again. And so you had this cycles of up and downs of very low lows and very, very high highs of oil prices. I think there will continue to be a cycle. One of the big differences today is the resources that we have in shale. The tight oil is huge; it's enormous, and we're very early in the production process there, in the recovery process. I think recovery rates today are about 10% or something like that. That's pretty low. And I would tell you we're very early on the technology curve associated with that. So for the way I define the problem today, certainly in the medium term, is where the resources are. The challenge is extracting them economically and efficiently. And so that's kind of the question. Will price allow you to do that? And where price is at today, you're already seeing some moderation, but there's plenty of for oil out there. So that's the challenge, and that's what we're working on. And we have a very large unconventional business. We're bringing. When we got into this business, we bought our way into it. We missed the shell. We didn't recognize the potential for fracking and unlocking those reserves. We bought our way into that. The way we've approached it, though, is I don't know how many of you like baseball, but we're in the season now. So, I talk about the shale players and the independents. It's a short ball game. It's all kind of singles and doubles, all infield kind of balls. We're a long ball player. We hit home runs and grand slams. We got the heft to go do that. And so my challenge to our organization was, how does a long ball player participate in the tight oil game? And so what you see us doing today in that unconventional space is basically bringing the scale and the technology of ExxonMobil to what I consider to be a fairly immature resource. And I think that's going to be the future for a long time of that resource play, and demand will continue to grow. Of course, the depletion curves continue to happen, and I'd say society as a whole don't fully comprehend that you can have zero growth and still have you got to bring 7% new production on every year just to offset the decline rate. In any other business, 7% new capacity every year is a high growth business. So we actually think of ourselves as being in a high-growth business, even if demand is flat or declining. A couple other points for you if you're concerned about the future of oil. If you take a 2-degree scenario, given the decline curve, you still need to invest on the trillions of dollars through 2040 in order to bring more oil on. If you take a 1.5-degree scenario with the decline that you see in production, you still need to invest in oil and gas. And so there continues to be a need to invest in the business. The biggest threat is where that supply-demand balances meet and where the price is. And so the successful companies in this space will be the lowest cost companies. So from my perspective, I grew up in our downstream business. It's a margin business. It's been oversupplied since I've been in the company. And the trick in that business is to be the low-cost supplier. And I would tell you that what we're doing as a company is making sure that the production that we bring on is on the far left-hand side of the supply curve. So no matter where that supply-demand balance goes, no matter what price gets set in the marketplace, we'll be below it and make a margin while others won't. And that's the strategy that we're pursuing.
Do you want to comment how many rigs you have running in the Permian right now?
Well, I'm not going to talk about that.
I didn't think you would.
Everybody wants to, it's publicly available information.
No, but I mean, you guys have 60 rigs running.
Yeah,
you were
right.
recently cited as having a really good formula for doing things. So, elephants can do pirouettes, right? I mean, you have proven, like you said, that you're a long ball player, and the question really is how are other companies going to follow that? Because like you said, they were really about making hits and getting their market share and getting, the question I want to ask, as unconventional as my life, is, why doesn't or why don't, pardon me, poor English, why don't the super majors just buy everybody? And, there is a theory that's going to happen. But
I think that theory, I mean, if you look at normal, forget about just our industry or the unconventional piece of it, generally in industries, you have this dynamic where there is always consolidation. You have this organic growth, small companies come in, and then over time, the industries consolidate. We see that. My expectation is we're going to see that consolidation happen in the unconventionals. Yeah. And you just got to get yourself through that. You got to get to a point where people all start to align on what the future looks like. And again, because it's such an immature play, and I say that in the kind of the time frame of this industry, and some people would tell you from a tech standpoint it's old, but from our industry standpoint it's very immature. People are slowly starting to get aligned on that. You see, I get asked all the time when we're going to buy somebody, some of these small companies, and I kept saying they're overpriced.
They are.
And a year ago, people kept asking me about that. And I said, when people begin to realize what the true value of that is, then or what the market values of it, then we might buy something. But until that happens, we're not going to.
Well, and this is an Exxon Darren Woods discussion, but probably not a lot of people here know that companies like Aramco have a huge unconventional development play. They program. Bahrain is now into it. Abu Dhabi National Oil Company is now into it. They're not particularly as aggressive, say, as Aramco is, which still lacks in technology and other things, but I'm sure they'll partner. Some of the bigger plays, Vaca Muerta, Algeria is a giant shale, hell, South Africa is a giant shale. Parts of Russia are bigger than continental U.S. maybe in shale. These things are long-term. People who are interested in oil and gas can see this for a long time, but those are going to be very difficult places to get to work. They haven't been proven yet. And as you pointed out, with your MBA, because I don't have one, they have to be economically viable or nobody's going to pay attention to you. And hence, Argentina may have the most beautiful shale in the world, but until it actually hits a profit curve, it's going to be tough. So. Well,
I think, there's a lot of factors that go into this equation. And with Argentina, geopolitical ones are really, and I think, unfortunately with Argentina, and we have had this discussion with the president down there, and this was the story of Latin America and Argentina, Peru, some of these others is it's 3 steps forward, 4 steps back. It's just been this long history of unrealized potential, and I think unfortunately we're seeing that again in Argentina where there's huge potential there. The Vaca Muerta is a really it's got the potential, but the government has very mixed views about how they best develop those resources, and I think the current administration, I think, had a very good handle of what needed to happen. That there's going to be an election that may change. It looks like it's going to change, and I suspect it's going to come back where they're going to start to interfere with the marketplace. Canada did the same thing. Canada started curtailing production. That's changed our investment profile up there. Anytime governments start intervening in markets, you start distorting them, and we carry enough risk as a global company that when people decide that they can better control markets than the markets themselves, we tend to kind of take a dim view of that and step out.
Great point. I was at Calgary a couple of weeks ago, and I did meet with your XTO president, and he and others said the same thing when Alberta decided to use price regulation, or I guess they did curtailment to regulate the price. Everybody just like froze. How's that going to survive? How's that going to help you survive in an environment so dependent on oil and gas? It's a very strange town right now. I don't know if you've been there lately, but it was a great ATCE for those of you who went. Our officers certainly went, but did you get the feeling when we met with the student chapter that job prospects were pretty tough? How many students enrolled in petroleum engineering as a major? Do you remember that, what they told us? Exactly 1. So, these are tough times. I was going to ask if you had any thoughts on, this is a hard question, but it's still something that, when you answer it, it becomes personal. What's your best day on the job and what's your worst?
Well,
So they'll understand because they're going to have to do this someday. They're going to have best days, they're going to have worst days.
well, let me take it maybe down a little bit. I mean, I've been fortunate in my career with this company to have done a lot of different jobs. I would tell you, the worst day across the many jobs I've had in my career is when you're running an operation, somebody's injured. And I think you all recognize the inherent exposures that come with our industry, and a lot of the processes, equipment. There's a lot of stored energy, a lot of risk and potential risk there, and it's when you're trying to manage an operation. In my case, I was running a refinery, 1,200 people in the refinery. That's a constant challenge every day. And when you have a serious incident, which we do a really good job of minimizing those, but we haven't completely eliminated them, those are your worst days. And I can tell you, when it happened in my refinery, had an individual who was not following the procedure, ended up covering himself in residue off of a vacuum tower in the refinery and was severely burned. He spent many days in the hospital, and I was in the hospital with him every day, and that was and his mother, his father, his sister were all there every day. I spent time talking to him. That's tough. And I would tell you, I hope none of you have to experience that. We're working really hard so none of our people have to experience it. That is definitely your worst day. Best day? I think there are lots of challenges in this industry. A lot of different jobs I've had always had big challenges. I think overcoming that challenge with a team, accomplishing something that people say couldn't get done is a huge, but for me, that makes my day. I love that. That's setting a goal, deciding what you're going to go do something, going to do, put into place a plan to go make that happen. You go work that, drive that, and then you realize the benefits. That's a lot of fun. One of my jobs, I did some trading. We used to do trading. I ran a trading group. Negotiating some good, playing in some good trades and making some big money in a trade is a pretty exhilarating time. I've had jobs negotiating big commercial deals. I'm a pretty aggressive commercial person, so pushing the envelope on that and winning after a bluff is a good high. So there are a lot of fun. I mean, a lot more highs than lows, I can tell you that, which I think you got to have that if you're going to have a successful career. So,
well, let's lighten it up for a moment. You ever been fired? I'll give you a hint. A guy who dresses like this and talks like me, I've been fired twice, but both times it was for insubordination. So I'm just curious.
I can believe that. It's not a real stretch of my imagination. No, I'll tell you a story. So I've never been fired, but so I got out of AM, went to work for a company called TRW out in the West Coast, decided to quit that job and get my MBA. Spent 2 years getting an MBA, so 5 years kind of into my career outside of A&M. I then joined Exxon, went out to the East Coast. It was in New Jersey. And I hired in under a new program. I was 26 years old. I hired into our headquarters, international headquarters for Exxon at the time. The average age in the headquarters was 51. And so I'm a 26-year-old kid in this average age of 51. They gave me a mentor to help me adjust to coming to work for Exxon. And probably I bought a house. My wife had complained, 5 years into living in student housing and business school, I really want a house. And so when we got out, we bought this house. We moved into our house in December. I started working for the company August 31st, 1992. We moved in the house on December 1st. I think December 5th, I came home and I told her, how much do you like this house? And she said, why do you ask me that? I said, I think when I joined the company, it was an up or out program. You either succeed or we fire you. And I told her, I think I'm going to get fired. And she said, why? I said, I had lunch with my mentor, and he told me the best way to get ahead in this company is to keep your head down. And I said, I didn't quit my job, get an MBA, and come all this way to keep my head down. So if that's what it takes to get ahead, then I'm going to get fired. And she's like, okay, just let me know when it happens. And so I always tell people, I tell people, which is kind of a strange thing, and they ask me sometimes what was kind of one of the secrets to your success in the company, and I said I kept working to get fired. What do I mean by that? I mean, I focused on doing what was right and not worrying what everyone else thought and trying to keep my head down, and it worked out. Lo and behold, the advice I got from a mentor wasn't the right advice. The company actually was looking for people to find ways to contribute and add value, and the fact that nobody else was willing to do that and I was, resulted in very positive things. And so I think the most powerful thing in my career was basically realizing that I'd rather get fired than have a career where I was stifled. And that's one of the reasons why I say what's really important is to thy own self be true. Figure out what's important to you and then live by that, because that will be the definition of success. It's not about the money. It's not about the job title. It's about when you go home, do you feel good about yourself? Did you enjoy what you did during the day? And if you can answer that in the affirmative, you'll be happy. And I think that's my rule, and that's kind of, I think, how I got this job.
My story is very similar, except that getting fired was very liberating. It hurt like hell at the time, but it opened a lot of doors, and it made a lot of things different that I hadn't expected. And, I guess sort of along the same lines, I would say, don't question what God puts in your path, because it is there for a reason. I'm not trying to be religious. I'm just saying that my philosophy is deal with what comes along, be who you are, and always be a truth teller, because somebody's not. And that keep your head down philosophy, that's old school. And by the way, our generation, you and me, that's how we were treated. And a lot of our colleagues think that's how young people should be treated. And I will not tolerate that. I will not, we got sent on terrible duties. We got laughed at. We got yelled at. We got all those things. I don't believe in that. I don't think people learn from that. Oh, it was a different time, those sorts of things. But I don't think that's an effective way of motivating people to be better.
Well, I think, with our company, all it took was a good argument. I mean, I always tell people the best way to get your ideas across to make a difference is to make a compelling case, and that's within your control. This idea that somehow somebody's being kept down, or I always look, I think the worst thing you can do in life is become a victim. And I always talk about my kids, because they're the people I care most about in life, and so any advice I give them, I figure is good advice to share, because I'm very vested in their success. But I tell them, once you become a victim, it's no longer in your control. You've given power to somebody else. And that means you've lost, because there's nothing you can do if you're a victim. And so this idea that figure out what you can do to make a difference. Yes, things are unfair. Yes, there are these circumstances that you're going to not have control over. But it's your response that matters. And you have complete control of that. And so when people say, well, nobody's listening to my ideas, my kind of charge back was, are you making a compelling case? Because my experience has been most people won't ignore a compelling case that brings value, particularly if they can take credit for it. And throughout my career, I allowed anybody to take credit for my ideas that wanted to. It didn't matter to me who took credit. It mattered to me whether we did those things and created the value. And if somebody wanted to put their hands up and take credit, I'll let them do that. And the reality is, over time, people see through all that. They know who's doing what. You don't have to worry about that. Just go do that. And so that's kind of my view on that stuff. And our company is and we pride ourselves on being a meritocracy. We try to judge people based on what they contribute, what they bring to the game. And so if you stay focused on that, which is where the fun is, frankly, and that's where the fun is, it's actually where the rewards are as well. So what better life to have than when the fun is consistent with the rewards?
That's a great point about other people taking credit for your work. Again, we were taught differently here, but it still happens in the real world that does. And great advice, because if you fight that battle, you just get dirty, and they look like they're genuine. They look like they actually did it. And you're right, in time it works out. I keep thinking of my own experience. I'll just stop there and ask, let's everybody kind of close your eyes and think back. And we're going to ask Mr. Woods to remember what it was like being a senior at Texas A&M. What would you tell yourself now knowing what you know, what would you tell your 21-year-old self? And I want to tell you, what I'd tell myself is stay in school, okay? Because I love graduate school. You can have undergrad. I'd stay in graduate school for 1,000 years before I'd go back to undergraduate for a day. But I don't want to bias you. You go ahead and tell us what you think.
Well, I think you've heard a lot of my, some of the philosophy I have, which if I didn't understand that, then I would really want to convey about your values and being true to yourself and those things. Probably the one thing we haven't talked about that I would, again, another piece of advice I give my kids is don't close any door that's been open for you. I think, in my mind, I got really clear on what I thought I wanted to do in life, and I'm nowhere. I mean, I ended up someplace completely different than what I thought I was going to, and I was so sure of myself when I was a kid. I thought I knew. I thought I had all the answers. And I say kid, I apologize for that because it's 32 years ago, so it's a very different dynamic. But I just thought I knew what was going to happen. And actually, I never would have come to work for Exxon. I was in business school. I was filling out applications. I went to interview. I didn't want to work for Exxon. They invited me to come in and interview. My counselor said, you never turn down an interview because it's a chance to practice, if nothing else. So, okay, I went to the interview. I left there not very impressed with the individual or the company, quite frankly. Went on Christmas break, came back, had an application to fill out. It was a general application that anybody who was hiring onto the company filled out. So it asked you how many words a minute you could type. It asked you all kinds of stuff on there that I just thought as an MBA student I was better than that. And so I was kind of complaining to my wife. I remember still sitting there at the kitchen table and thinking, I'm not going to fill this thing out. And my wife said, get over yourself. Why would you close a door that's been open for you? And I said, okay. And I filled the application out, got a call, went for the interview, spent 2 days interviewing with the group out in New Jersey, and thought this could be something, joined the company. As I said, I always thought this would be a trial, and now here I am 27 years later. And so I would have never, in fact, when I was at A&M interviewing for jobs, I went to a refinery, and I came back and I told my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, I'd never work at a refinery. And I ended up running one. I mean, I just think, life has this way of moving around, and you just got to just keep an open mind and stay, figure out what you like, test it, stick to it, and then things have a way of working out. It's amazing.
Sounds like you married well.
I did.
I did too, but mine told me the other day that this increases your risk of stroke by 500%. But my wife's a gynecologist, so what the hell does she know?
I'm not going there.
Well, I'm glad that got to some of you. I'm going to throw you a softball, and you could make this about your kids, but tell us about your pets. Got any pets? I'll start, if you don't mind. I got 4 Chihuahuas buried about 150 yards south of here on Angus Carey and Welsh, where we used to live. So I'm not going to talk about them. But do you have pets? You got kids?
Yeah.
Oh, you can think about
close.
some Chihuahuas in the ground.
No, it's funny. I grew up. My father was a big hunter. We grew up hunting. I had dogs my whole life. I'm a big dog lover, but since we were moving around and a lot when we were growing up, I never felt it was fair to have a dog when we were moving the way and the travel that I had. I'll tell you a quick story. My oldest son, was a huge animal lover, just like his dad when he was little. And when he was 4, he asked me if he could have a dog. And I told him, no, you're too young. And he said, why am I too young? I said, you can't take care of it. He said, well, when can I have a dog? I said, when you're old enough to take care of it. And he said, well, when is that? And I said, when you're 10. He's 4. And I never gave another thought about it. He never said anything about it. And when he was turning 10, I said, what do you want for your birthday? He says, I want my dog. That's a true story. I mean, for 6 years, a 4-year-old kid thought about this dog. And so I bought him a dog Bible like that. And I said, you need to read this book to learn how to take care of dogs because this is your dog. And if the dog's not well behaved, we're not going to keep the dog. And then we had to get one. My wife hated dogs. But we did research, and we ended up buying a boxer. And my son who was 10, trained that. It was the best trained dog I've ever had in my life. Beautiful dog, loved the kids. And we had that dog up until she got a rare disease, and that was the last pet we had.
I want to meet this son because my daughter wanted 2 pot-bellied pigs, and for 2 years she told me, Daddy, I want a pig, Daddy, I want a pig, Daddy, I want a pig. And I gave in. I couldn't stand it anymore, so we had 2 pot-bellied pigs over there too. So,
my daughter wanted a hedgehog, and I told her, if you keep your room picked up for a month, I'll buy you a hedgehog, and she was never able to do that, so I never had to buy a hedgehog.
well, another story about daughters is every time mine takes $200 out of an ATM, she gets another tattoo. Now top that. Okay, if you hadn't become an engineer, what would you be? This is a tough question because I treat engineering like a chronic disease. I never wanted to be an engineer. Look at me, you know.
I don't know. I've never even thought about that because I just think engineering, it teaches, I haven't done a day's lick of electrical engineering work since I graduated from A&M. I mean, that's the honest truth. I've evaluated a lot of engineering problems and stuff, but no hardcore engineering stuff, electrical engineering stuff. But I think the discipline and the way it teaches you to think about problems and taking these amorphous problems and breaking them down, it's just a really critical skill that will apply itself to all kinds of different opportunities in life. So I don't know. I can't even imagine what my life would be like without being an engineer. I like negotiating. I like deals. I like doing deals. So I probably would have gone into something along those lines, but I don't think I would have been as good at it as I am
I don't
today.
think so because you have to have the discipline to know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Know when to walk away. Yes, absolutely right.
Well, why don't we go to the student questions? You guys have an order, I believe. You want to? Oh, you got a hot mic? Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
All right, so this will conclude the fireside chat portion of this evening. Our next and last segment will be student Q&A. So the following 7 short questions are the most popular questions submitted by Texas A&M students for you, Mr. Woods. And the questions will be read by our Texas A&M SBE student officer team. So you mentioned don't close any doors that are opened and don't be a victim. Maybe extending off of that, what is one of the most valuable pieces of advice you've been given for life, but then also just work in general?
Well, one of the things, certainly for work, and what I really encourage our leadership to think, I think balance is really important. I mean, life is all about trade-offs. Work is too. I mean, everything you do in life. I just think, people talk about work-life balance and stuff, and I would just tell you, yeah, but that's always been an issue. I mean, and guess what? Everybody's balance is different. There's no one point that defines the right way of doing it. So it's all about striking the right balance. In my company, we were just talking to one of our the mechanical manager at one of our chemical plants is here. He was a recruiter, and the big challenge I was talking to him about in maintenance was, cutting costs in repairs without compromising the integrity of your operations or the reliability. There's a balance to be struck there. How do you do that? I think there's a lot of that in life. And so I think, in my mind, it's, striking the right balance. You want to empower your organization, but at the same time, you need to hold them accountable. And so if you just think about the challenges in life, you want to drive efficiency and be low cost, but at the same time, you want to grow your business. There's lots of competing factors, and professionally and personally. And I think, one of the secrets to success is figuring out how to strike that right balance and not going too far to one extreme or the other. And I would tell you that is probably the biggest challenge of management. I always talk about it as being a pendulum. And it's really easy to drive a pendulum to one stop or the other stop. The hard point is figuring out where the right place is, the pendulum, and to hold it there. And that's what I would say is figure out how to do that in whatever you choose to do.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So everyone says they want to be a CEO, but is there anything in particular that you've done in your career that actually helped you differentiate yourself from your peers and allow you to be selected as the next CEO of ExxonMobil?
Well, I didn't want to be the CEO. So from that standpoint, I'm not sure I was that successful. To me, I never, in our company, I moved around, I talked about all the jobs I've had. I never thought about the next one. And, what I thought about was, okay, you've been given a responsibility. Typically, the way we develop people, we're always giving them, for folks we're trying to develop, giving them a job that is not quite sure whether you can do or not. And so I can tell you, over the course of my career, every job you step into, there's a little bit of uncertainty as to whether you can actually do what's being required because you've never done it before. And so I always very much focused on doing that job the best I could. And I also had a philosophy that I wanted to leave that job better than I found it. And I also thought about the job as the one that I was going to have for the rest of my career. So that's the way I really, and I can tell you, I was never ready to leave any job they asked me to move on from, because I was committed to that job and I didn't worry. And then when they gave me the next job, I never thought about, well, how's that going to help me get to this job? I only thought about, can I see an opportunity to develop myself in that job? Can I develop professionally? Can I develop personally? And then that was the test I used in the job as to whether that was a good job, was whether or not I was developing. Not whether or not this was the next incorrect stepping stone to the next job. I never thought about that, ever. And then when it came to the point where at the end, Rex Tillerson was the CEO before I was, he brought two of us up, myself and another individual, and it was clear to the whole organization, okay, these are the two guys that are running for this next CEO job. And my point was, I'm not running for anything. I'm going to do the best I can in this space, and frankly, I'd prefer to be the number two than the number one, because there's a lot of stuff that comes with number one that it's not that fun. And I don't particularly like the limelight, and so I would have been very happy as number two or number three or whatever. There's still a lot of, so I wasn't running for it. I just focused on doing the best. In fact, when I was given the job, Rex offered it to me. He didn't offer me, actually told me, this is your new job. And I said, I don't really want it. And he said, that's one of the reasons why you got it. So I don't know, you can take that, for what it's worth, but, okay?
Thank you. With the advent of renewable resources, it's going to lead to financial stresses on oil majors such as ExxonMobil. Is this going to lead to reductions in research expenses and also lead to less dependency on major service companies such as Schlumberger or Halliburton? And could we see the acquisitions of these service companies by the oil majors?
Remember, this is a student question, so there's a lot of things they may or may not really see they don't know your organization, and they probably don't realize how much you invest in research per year and other things.
No, but I think it's really important. I think our philosophy, I mentioned about the $1 billion a year that we spend, and we've been pretty consistently spending that. I think when it comes to R&D and science and the technology, you can't turn that on and turn it off. It's kind of a capabilities-based piece of the business. So I will tell you, even when things, in 2014, when the price came off, 2015, and oil prices were really low, and people were having layoffs in the industry and the rest of that, we never cut back on our R&D spending, because our view was, this is not a flywheel. You can't, you're building capabilities that are working for long-term, medium to long-term solutions. This is not a short-term thing. So we do not vary that by part of the cycle. Our philosophy in our company, and it's one that we've worked on many, is to get large enough and to have the scale and to build the financial capacity to weather the cycles. And so if you look at what we try to do is, and certainly in my very big focus, I actually want to invest counter-cyclically. So when the oil prices come off, I want to go out and spend money and buy assets, acreage, whatever is we see a value proposition on. That is not what the Wall Street analyst wants you to do. And so I think if you were to talk to a lot of those guys, they would tell you, don't listen to what I tell you, because I'm not about returning. My view is the best use of our cash is investing in accretive opportunities, and we're aggressively doing that. And I'll return cash to the shareholders when I don't have a highly accretive investment to make. So to your second point about, do you buy service companies? And from my perspective, service companies, I think there'll be a lot of pressure on them as they've experienced when the demand goes down. I think it's going to force them to have adjust their business models. But I see a role in them as long as there's cyclicality in the business. Because quite frankly, it's very difficult for any one company, even for ExxonMobil with the size that we are, to make the investments that you're going to need to manage through the highs and the natural cycles of the activity in your business. And so what we tend to do is, as a minimum, you'd want to invest kind of in some base load, but you're going to do peak topping with contractors, and so I continue to see a role there. The other thing is, a lot what the contractors can do is by aggregating the demand across the industry, they can get scale, they can focus on the initiatives, the improvements, and they can actually make advances that independent, other companies can't because they don't have the same scale. So I think there's going to continue to be a role. And to your final point, whether we'd be interested in buying them, I mean, from my perspective, you'd have to say, what can I uniquely bring? What is my competitive advantage that I can bring to this space that would add unique value? And if I saw an opportunity to do that, I'd consider it. But today, I don't really see that opportunity.
Anyway, you would take your technologies that you develop, license it to them, use it through them. I mean, when we were young, it was the last time that, say, Texaco had their own rigs or Amoco had their own crews or whatever you might want to say. By the way, what's the important point about those two companies? They don't exist anymore. But, this is not the kind of thing I would expect an oil and gas company to do, is to go back to the model where they have their own services.
Yeah, the only what I'd say is potential deviation from that. One of the challenges, if you look at the upstream business, because of this contractor model and the economics associated with the need for it, technology advances are quickly disseminated across the industry. It's very hard to hold competitive advantage in technology in the upstream because of, I think in big part because of this contractor, where you get these folks to kind of take, and then next thing you know, they deviate and then make a little small adjustment, get outside any patents, and then they propagate that around. So I would tell you the dispersion of technology advantages in the upstream is very, very rapid. Downhole stuff you can tend to kind of hang on to. Anything above anything up above is difficult. So part of the challenge I've talked to our organization about is, how do you hang on? How do you build higher barriers to technology and losing technology advantage? Given that we're making these big investments, we'd like to hang on to any advantage that we extract. That could lead to some derivative of this model, which I've challenged these guys to kind of think about.
Excellent point. I hadn't thought of that. That is a unique opportunity, perhaps, but as you point out, anything that hits the market through the service sector immediately propagates. Whether people can afford it or not is another story, but they will, as you said, tweak it. Go ahead, Trevor. Sorry.
Thank you. As a young engineer seeking to add value in a company, what technical or professional skill would you recommend focusing on during the first few years of a career?
So what I would look for as a young engineer coming out of school is a company that is committed to developing a foundation of skill sets. If I tell you one of the reasons that drove me out of the business, the job that I had, was I got into a company out of A&M, and they were very interested in me becoming an expert in this particular technology, which had a shelf life. And I had no mechanism in my mind. I couldn't see a path clear of doing anything but basically living and dying with this technology, which was a problem. So I think, rather than pick a skill set, because I think you're going to need a bunch of them, is to find a company that recognizes the value of having and the synergies that exist between these skill sets, and they build off. These things are not independent, so to speak. I mean, there's a lot of cross-fertilization that's happening, in your brain as you learn different things and how you put these together. So I would be focused on a company that recognizes the value of a multi-discipline, multi-experience, multi-skill set development, and then what order you get them in, I think, is much less important than getting them. And I would also strongly encourage you to find a company that's willing to invest in operational experiences. because I just think you learn a lot about yourself and a lot about the business when your hands are out there on the tools, so to speak, or on the valves, or however you want to think about it. It's for us in our company, if you want to advance to the upper echelons of management, at some point you have to have a big operating job, because the way we talk about it within the company is you can't hide from any mistakes in an operating job. And the challenges have been planted years ago, and you're dealing with stuff all the time. It's coming up at you, and your individual's ability to manage all that successfully, I think, really says something about the capabilities of a person.
And unfortunately, misquote your wife, this is a door that's open to people. There are operational jobs out there right now, including with your company. It may be a little difficult to find them, but there are companies that are hiring engineers as field personnel. It's a little bit hard to see that when you come out with degree in hand, but as you pointed out, once you go through that path, no one's ever going to fool you or deceive you or, well, you know where I'm going with this.
Well, I'll just tell you a story. I got out of MBA school. I joined Exxon. I worked 3 years in New Jersey. They sent me overseas. I spent, I think, 2 years in a refinery there, and on the third year into that job. So this is now 6 years into ExxonMobil and 11 years out of school. They put me on the plant working shift with a bunch of operators, which in that refinery was at a classification level well below the one that I was at. And I knew instantly why they were doing that. They basically said you won't be successful if you can't go manage the challenges, and you can't relate with the people that are out there, basically the ones who ultimately make the money for this company. And so I went and did that. I only did it for a year, but man, that was one of the best jobs I ever had, working shifts. I can still remember being out, I was just in England, in the rain at night turning valves, and thinking to myself, I got an MBA to do this. But I tell you, it paid off. I spent 1 year on operations in a refinery. The next job I had in a refinery was refinery manager.
Just curious, did they have pagers whenever you were in the refinery?
Yes.
And I bet you either took the battery out of yours when you left or you threw it against the wall.
No. No, the funny thing was, when I was running the refinery, every time my phone went off at home, the kids knew that the weekend was over or the night was over, because something happened, I got to go in. And the funny thing about it is when I got out of that job, and every time I noticed then when the phone would ring, everybody in the family would tense up, because I thought, okay, Dad's leaving. And I can remember being at the dinner table telling everybody, no, it's okay. I don't do that job anymore, so I don't have to leave, and at the drop of a hat. It was really kind of an interesting dynamic.
Try being married to a gynecologist. You never go anywhere without two cars, my friend. I could count 2,000 times where she's left. Let's go, Kenta.
Thanks so much. I have a question. As a CEO, you might have to take lots of variables into consideration when making decisions, which some people might disagree with. So in order to make it successful as a team or as a company, how do you go about making decisions in such kind of case?
Yeah, I think, I made this point very early on about being an effective manager, leader. One of them is, know yourself, and more importantly, know your weaknesses. I have a saying that none of us are as smart as all of us. And so I really try to focus and develop. I got a management committee that works with me. I've got a bunch of folks that come and present, and my objective is for big decisions, I engage a lot of those folks in that discussion and at the table. And, one of the things I always try to do is take the other side. And, some people in our company have kind of gotten to a position with trying to anticipate what the CEO wanted and then come in with a proposal that they thought that the CEO would want. And the problem with me when they do that is I take the opposite side of the argument, because I really want to know, how did you come to that conclusion and can you defend it? And so I really have tried to create a dynamic where there's lots of conversation and debate around there to make sure that we're kind of fully flushing out all the variables and the range of potential consequences. And so that's a really big part of my management style. It's very active and contributory style. It's not an easy style because you don't get to come into the table with bad ideas, and your suggestions need to be good ones. But those are table stakes to get to the table with the CEO. I always think. The other thing that I'm big on is, I don't know if you all talk about red and blue teams. Is that something you guys have? Red and blue teams. So red and blue teams. No. Red and blue teams is when you've got a big decision to make. You actually put charge. You form a group of people whose job it is to tear down the idea, and you put a group of people in. They're independent of the idea, and put another group of people in to basically find upside to the idea. And so the intent there is you've got stake owners, you've got project developers, people who own that idea and they believe in it and they've developed all the economics. But if it's really big, you say, now I'm going to go task 2 independent teams, one to tear it down, one to build it up, and then we all get together and talk about it. And it allows you to kind of open your mind up and really think hard about what are the potentials, what are the downsides, what are the upsides. It's really important to think about upsides as well. It's very easy to focus on the downsides and then not make a decision. You got to be very conscientious of the upsides that you're passing up. And oh yeah, being on the red team where you're tearing down somebody's idea is hard work, and nobody likes to be on red teams because you're kind of the bad person, so to speak. But
People like that. Not me. Go ahead.
You kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. What impact has Texas A&M had on your career? What opportunities has it opened? What doors has it opened, et cetera?
Yeah, so I know there's a lot of networking, and this is probably not going to go down very well with this crowd, but I have just to be honest. So I've never I have this very strong belief about I want to get things done myself. It's about what I can contribute, and so I've never tried to leverage the Aggie network for a benefit. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that. And that's a big part of A&M, and there's a lot of that goes on out there, and I'm fine with it. It's just personally for me, it was something about I wanted to do it on my own. When I was at A&M, I was talking earlier. They asked me, how was your experience at A&M? I said it was hard work because I wanted to get out in 4 years. I wanted to make really good grades, and I wanted to pay for it myself. And so I had 2 jobs when I was going to school and then carrying this workload. And so it was just really, really hard work, but I just had this very strong desire to do it, to be able to say I did this myself. And so I never really leveraged the AM network, and I didn't do it. And at work today, I really don't present myself as an Aggie at work. And I know that doesn't sound like I'm loyal to the school, but what I don't want to have happen is anybody in our company to think that Aggies have an advantage because I'm an Aggie. And so I don't talk A&M up at work, and I don't participate in the A&M stuff, even though personally I would like to, because I worry that everybody else will think, you got an inside, if you're an Aggie, you get to go meet with the CEO and talk to them. And so I really think, I worry about that, and so I tend to try to play that down. Same thing with Northwestern. There's a number of Northwestern grads at A&M, at Exxon, and they asked me to come give a talk to the Northwestern folks at our campus for ExxonMobil, and I said, I'll come do that, but only if everybody's invited, because I got that sensitivity. So probably not the best answer. I'm probably not the answer that people want to hear, but it's just something that I believe in.
I think it may be our generation, you and I, because I don't wear the ring. I don't think about, I've lived Texas A&M for 40 years. I know every crack in the sidewalk, but I don't think about that network. I think about them as individuals. I think about how I can affect their future. I think about other things. I make my paltry donations to these things, but honestly, I feel like I'm invested in the values of Texas A&M, but football, when's the last time I went to a tailgate? Never. And, these things, I did used to go, but frankly, these are not the things that are important to me. The things that are important to me is seeing people that I'm responsible for succeed. It just happens to be here. And I feel maybe, people misjudge me for that because I do bleed marooner than anybody you know, but I just don't bleed in public. And I feel like you're probably the same way. It's not my role to.
See, if I was here at A&M, I'd go to all the games because I worry that we've got Longhorns, we've got, Tigers, we got all kinds of folks working for our company, and every one of them has exactly the same shot. And I don't want anybody to, to me, one of the things we're very focused on is perceptions, and so that's how I try to manage it. And I never tried to get my kids to go to any, I never said you should go to A&M. It's their choice. The fact that my middle child, my second son, went to A&M, I was damn proud of that. but only after he made the decision, not beforehand. And I loved coming down and seeing him, and so it was nice to reconnect to the school that way. But I try to keep that personal, just because of the fact that I feel like I have a broader obligation. When I'm out of this job and I'm no longer running a large organization, then I suspect I'll be more active at A&M because then I get to kind of let my hair down, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
So I will comment that after nearly 40 years of therapy on Texas A&M football, I can watch it on TV without throwing a hammer at it. But, and nobody took the loss this weekend more personally than I did, but that's okay. I'm all right with that. I believe Anthony Jimenez has our last question, and it's a doozy. You're going to love it.
So, Mr. Woods, if you open up the prize by Daniel Yergin, a character that you learn about very quickly is John Rockefeller. Something interesting about him is that he had a nightly routine where he would go and have a conversation with himself to remind himself to be humble. Just kind of wanted to see, what do you do to try to maintain your humility? And if you have any advice on how to balance success, ambition with humility.
Well, this industry keeps you pretty humble. It's been my experience. And if you've ever been in operations, that keeps you pretty humble. Actually, I have an interesting, so I don't define myself as by this job. I didn't aspire to it. And again, I don't define myself by it. I have a rule, I don't bring work home with me. From the standpoint of, if my family ever knows something's going on at work, that's to me a failure. And so, my kids are all out of the house now, but as we were growing up, we always had a routine where we would eat dinner together. And I'd often get home late. They'd get their homework done. I'd get home, and then we'd have dinner, and then we'd just talk. And I never talked about work. In fact, my kids never really knew what I was doing, and my wife probably didn't know what I was doing, frankly, because I just felt like, I had to learn to compartmentalize. And for me, home was home, and work was work, and I was very guarded about mixing those two things up. And so, when I go home, I'm dad to the kids, and I always tried to encourage my kids to be thoughtful and to think hard. And so they used to challenge me and, try to point out all my failings and issues and things. And that was just the way we were. So I've never really thought of myself as the CEO. I really don't think of myself in those terms. My kids and my family have all kept me pretty grounded. So it's just... when I go home, I don't like being identified. I try to keep a pretty low profile. And my dad had a saying when I was growing up. He used to say, everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. And kind of a corny saying, but it's a way of kind of reminding yourself, at the end of the day, people are people. And I can tell you, I've met with probably just about every world leader you could name. A lot of, influential people here in the U.S. It's interesting that when you get to know them, people are people. I just think you just got to continue to remember that. I talk about the nature of the human beast. It's just this. We are, at the end of the day, we are more alike than we are different as you go across different countries, different places, different socioeconomic things, and. I just continue to realize that. So I don't really think of myself much differently than I let others think of me differently. But if anybody ever says this, this job changes you because there's a tremendous weight you have to carry, and that you never get to put it down. So I can't say that the job hasn't changed me from the standpoint of the time I have and the way I think about things. But if anybody ever told me it made me a different person, I would be. In terms of how I acted towards them, I would be disappointed in myself.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, well, thank you everyone for attending tonight. Mr. Woods has to depart soon, but before he departs, we'd like to present him with a gift from the SPE student chapter here at Texas A&M. A lot of the students here in attendance have signed this evening for you, so just a gift to commemorate your visit with us. Let's give Mr. Woods and Dr. Blasingame one more round of applause for this evening.
Thank you, everybody. Gig 'em.